The hospital was a place people trusted, where families brought their loved ones hoping for care and recovery. Its clean white walls and polished floors gave an impression of safety, but behind that appearance, something was terribly wrong. Over a span of months, patients who seemed stable began dying in the middle of the night. Some had come in with minor issues, others were recovering after surgery, yet all of them shared the same fate: unexpected, unexplained death. At first, the staff whispered that maybe it was just chance. Hospitals saw tragedy often, and sometimes patients did not make it, even if they looked fine hours before. But the numbers were higher than usual, and the timing too consistent to ignore. Doctors wrote the deaths off as heart failure, complications, or natural decline, but the truth was more unsettling. The night shift had become the time of fear. Families noticed their relatives looked well when they left in the evening, only to receive a shocking phone call by morning. Staff members who raised concerns were told they were imagining patterns. Administrators feared the hospital's reputation would be damaged if rumors spread, so they downplayed every suspicion. Still, unease grew in the hearts of the nurses who worked closest to the patients. They began to quietly compare notes, realizing the same faces kept appearing in these unexplained cases. Patients who should have been walking out healed were being carried out lifeless. No alarms rang, no signs of distress were obvious until it was too late. It felt as though death moved silently through the corridors after dark, striking without warning. What no one could yet prove was that it was not chance at all. It was someone's careful hand guiding each tragedy, hidden in plain sight among those trusted to heal. The strange pattern began to tighten, like a knot that could no longer be ignored. A nurse who often reviewed patient charts started noticing something that made her uneasy. Nearly every unexplained death seemed to occur during the same hours, and more disturbingly, all under the care of one night shift staff member. At first, she thought it was just bad luck, the kind of misfortune that sometimes fell on people who worked nights. But as weeks turned into months, the coincidences became too sharp to dismiss. The patients who passed away had little in common: different ages, different conditions, different wards, but their final hours always linked back to that one individual. The nurse shared her concerns quietly with a colleague, who had also begun to wonder why these cases followed such a narrow trail. Both hesitated to speak openly, fearing accusations could end a career if proven wrong. The hospital was strict about protecting its image, and questioning a respected staff member could lead to harsh consequences. Rumors began to circulate among a small circle of workers, yet no one dared to formally report what they suspected. Management preferred to believe everything was under control, blaming stress, natural decline, or complications for the deaths. Meanwhile, the unexplained losses continued. Families were left devastated and confused, some of them wondering how their loved ones went from stable to lifeless overnight. Behind closed doors, staff members struggled with the weight of suspicion. They wanted to believe they were imagining it, but the pattern was too clear. Still, without proof, they were trapped in silence. What no one realized was that their hesitation was giving the silent killer more time, more victims, and more chances to perfect the deadly game being played under the hospital's roof. The breaking point came with a case no one could ignore. A young mother in her 30s had been admitted for a routine procedure, something so minor that she was expected to go home within a few days. She was cheerful, recovering well, and even spoke about returning to her children soon. Staff who checked on her noted her steady progress, and her family left the hospital reassured. But that same night, everything changed. She suddenly went into cardiac arrest and, despite desperate efforts to revive her, she died within minutes. Her death was recorded as unexpected complications, but the shock that rippled through the hospital was different this time. This was not an elderly patient or someone gravely ill. This was a healthy young woman whose death had no clear explanation. The hospital could no longer brush it aside as coincidence. An internal review was quietly ordered, and investigators began combing through the medical records of the patients who had died over the past months. What they found was unsettling. Time after time, the logs showed higher than normal doses of medication administered shortly before the deaths. On paper, it looked routine, but the amounts were just enough to tip the body into crisis. The pattern became impossible to deny. When investigators lined up the charts, one name appeared again and again. It was the same night shift worker whose presence had already drawn quiet suspicion among the staff. Each unexplained death was traced back to this individual's care. The chilling realization set in that these patients had not died naturally. They had been deliberately pushed toward death with carefully hidden overdoses. What had once been dismissed as unfortunate chance was now emerging as a calculated plan carried out under the cover of trust and responsibility. The investigation moved into a more dangerous phase once suspicions hardened into evidence. Authorities decided to act discreetly, placing hidden surveillance cameras in the hospital. The plan was to observe quietly, without alerting the suspect, and to gather undeniable proof of what had been happening during those late-night hours. For weeks, investigators watched as the suspect carried out normal duties, blending in with the rest of the staff. But patience paid off. One night, the footage revealed exactly what everyone feared. The individual was caught preparing syringes in secret, filling them with doses far beyond what was required, and slipping into patients' rooms during the quietest hours. The patients were injected quickly, without alarms, as though it were part of routine care. Minutes later, their conditions spiraled beyond saving. The truth was darker than anyone expected. The motive uncovered was not money or revenge, but something more disturbing, a hunger for control, the thrill of deciding who lived and who died. It was a twisted desire to play God inside a place dedicated to healing. When investigators pieced the evidence together, the scale of the crimes became clear. Dozens of unexplained deaths were now seen for what they truly were, murders disguised as medical complications. News of the discovery spread, shaking the hospital to its core. Families who had long mourned loved ones began to realize those deaths were not natural, but the result of cold and calculated actions. Fear and anger swept through the community, while staff who had once worked alongside the suspect were left stunned by the betrayal. The hospital, once a place of safety, was now seen as the hunting ground of a silent predator who had moved unnoticed through its corridors for far too long. The arrest came swiftly once the surveillance footage was secured. Authorities moved in during a night shift, ensuring there was no chance for escape. The suspect was led out in handcuffs, while shocked staff and patients watched in disbelief. News outlets quickly picked up the story, and within hours, headlines about a hospital worker turned serial killer spread across the country. Families who had lost loved ones demanded answers, their grief deepened by the revelation that the deaths were not fate, but the result of deliberate cruelty. In court, prosecutors presented the evidence with chilling detail. Patient charts showed the pattern of overdoses, the surveillance tapes displayed the act itself, and medical experts confirmed the deaths could not have been natural. As the facts unraveled, the image of a trusted caregiver crumbled into that of a cold manipulator. Each victim's name was read aloud, turning the trial into a haunting roll call of lives cut short. Relatives sat through the proceedings, some in tears, others in stunned silence, as they learned exactly how their loved ones had been taken from them. The defense attempted to argue mental instability, but the overwhelming proof left little doubt. The judge delivered a life sentence without possibility of parole, ensuring the silent killer would never harm another soul again. Yet justice, though served, could not erase the pain. The hospital's reputation was scarred, forcing new policies and stricter monitoring to protect patients from ever facing such betrayal again. The case became a grim reminder of how danger can hide behind a mask of trust. A place meant for healing had been turned into a hunting ground, and a caregiver had become a predator. The story still lingers, a warning that evil can exist even where safety is expected most.